I am Maya, 35 years old, and for 8 years I carried the weight of a betrayal that nearly broke me. My ex-husband Jamal drained our bank accounts down to exactly $42 and vanished with another woman, leaving me to drown in debt. Today, at my cousin Kendra's lavish wedding in Atlanta, he cornered me by the champagne tower with that same woman smirking as he told me that leaving me was the smartest thing he ever did. I had no idea that in just a few seconds, a little girl would run into my arms and completely shatter his arrogant illusion. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to rebuild your life from nothing after someone you loved tried to destroy it. Growing up in Atlanta, my family always valued appearances above everything else. Wealth and status were the only metrics that mattered. My cousin Kendra was marrying into a prominent real estate family, and her reception was held at a sprawling historical estate surrounded by manicured gardens and ancient oak trees. The ballroom was a spectacular sea of crystal chandeliers, white roses, and guests dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits. Waiters circulated with silver trays of expensive appetizers while a live jazz band played softly in the corner. I had spent the last 8 years actively avoiding these types of grand family gatherings. I knew exactly how my relatives whispered about me behind their perfectly polished hands. I was the family cautionary tale, the foolish woman who worked herself to the bone to put her ambitious husband through a prestigious business program, only to be discarded the moment he got his degree. But Kendra had always been exceptionally kind to me when others were not so. I put on a tailored emerald green dress, held my head high, and decided I would not let my past dictate my present. I walked toward the towering pyramid of crystal glasses, overflowing with expensive champagne, determined to enjoy the evening and celebrate my cousin. The room smelled of expensive perfume and roasted meats. I felt a rare sense of peace settling over me. I reached out, extending my hand to take a glass of champagne from the edge of the table. Just as my fingers brushed the cold glass, a sharp elbow slammed heavily into my ribs. The sudden impact pushed me sideways, forcing me to grab the edge of the linen-covered table to keep my balance. My drink splashed over the rim, soaking my hand and spotting the pristine white tablecloth. I turned around quickly, ready to accept a polite apology from a careless guest who had simply misjudged their steps on the crowded floor. Instead, the air left my lungs completely. Standing there with a perfectly practiced smirk was Jamal. My ex-husband looked older, but his custom-tailored charcoal suit and expensive gold watch screamed new money. Clinging tightly to his arm, looking like a predator examining its prey, was Chloe. She was the woman he had left me for all those years ago. She wore a champagne-colored silk gown that was entirely inappropriate for a wedding guest trying to upstage the bride, and her hair was styled in elaborate, expensive waves. For a split second, I felt that old familiar panic rising in my chest. The trauma of the past threatened to choke me. The last time I saw Jamal, he was walking out of our cramped apartment, carrying a leather duffel bag while I sat on the peeling linoleum floor, crying so hard I could not breathe. But I was not that broken 27-year-old girl anymore. I stood up straight and leveled my gaze. "Maya, look at you," Jamal said, his voice dripping with heavy condescension. "I am honestly surprised you made it past the security gate outside. I did not think this kind of high society crowd was really your scene anymore." I wiped the spilled champagne from my hand with a cocktail napkin, keeping my face completely blank. "Hello, Jamal," I said calmly. "It is a wedding, not an exclusive country club. We are both guests here to celebrate Kendra." He let out a harsh, mocking laugh, shaking his head as he looked me up and down. His eyes lingered on my dress, taking in every detail with clear judgment. "I am not just a normal guest," he boasted, puffing out his chest to ensure his expensive suit caught the light. "I am a vice president at Horizon Logistics now. We just signed a massive expansion deal for a new commercial warehouse in Midtown. I actually helped pay for a good chunk of this reception as a personal favor to your uncle. You know, since your side of the family always struggles to cover these kinds of luxury expenses." His words were meticulously designed to make me feel small, to remind me of the painful power dynamic he always craved. 8 years ago, he had stripped me of my dignity and my financial security in one swift motion. I vividly remembered the burning exhaustion in my legs from working double shifts at a busy downtown diner, serving endless plates of food to ungrateful customers, just to pay his tuition for his Master of Business Administration. I remembered coming home smelling like kitchen grease and cheap bleach, only to find him packing his bags into the trunk of his car. I remembered checking our joint checking account the next morning, praying there was enough money left to cover the upcoming rent, and seeing a balance of exactly $42. He had taken everything we had saved together to fund his new life with his mistress. Now he was standing here parading the wealth I helped him build. I see you are still wearing off the rack clothing, Jamal continued, leaning in closer, so his words would cut deeper. I used to feel slightly bad about how things ended between us, Maya. I really did. I thought maybe I was too harsh when I packed up and left you to figure things out on your own. But seeing you now still looking like you are barely scraping by in life, it just confirms what I knew back then. Leaving you was the smartest thing I ever did. You were always going to hold me back. You had a terrible poverty mindset, and I was destined for the executive board. I needed someone who understood wealth. Chloe let out a high-pitched theatrical giggle and leaned her head affectionately against his shoulder. She reached up with a manicured hand to adjust a heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone, making absolutely sure I caught the blinding sparkle under the ballroom chandeliers. "Oh, babe, do not be so incredibly mean to her," Chloe purred, though her eyes were cold and calculating. "It is not her fault she lacks vision and ambition. Honestly, Maya, you should be thanking me. If I had not stepped in and saved Jamal from that miserable little life you were dragging him into, he would probably still be suffocating in mediocrity. You always looked like such an exhausted charity case next to him. Someone had to rescue him and elevate him to his true potential." She looked me up and down, mimicking Jamal's intense judgment. "I heard you were still working in the food service industry for a long while after the divorce. That must have been so incredibly difficult for you, watching him rise to the top of the corporate ladder while you were still wiping down sticky tables. But I guess people naturally settle at their true level in life." I stood there listening to the two people who had gleefully dismantled my world stand in the middle of a beautiful celebration and try to tear me down all over again. The absolute audacity of their cruelty was almost impressive. Jamal stood tall, convinced he was the most important man in the room, convinced that his corporate title and his stolen wealth made him totally invincible. Chloe gripped his arm like a shiny trophy, firmly believing the grand illusion she had constructed for herself. They desperately wanted me to cry. They wanted me to lower my eyes, apologize for my mere existence, and scurry out the back doors of the estate in absolute shame. I took a slow, deep breath. I did not raise my voice or show anger. I did not show them a single ounce of the profound pain they were actively trying to inflict. I simply looked at Jamal and then at Chloe, letting a quiet, serene smile spread across my face. "You are right, Jamal," I said softly. "You did leave me with exactly $42. You did take everything I worked for to build your foundation. And Chloe, you are absolutely right about people settling at their true level in life." I was just about to tell them exactly what level I had reached when a sudden joyful noise cut through the heavy tension surrounding us. A voice so bright and pure it made the entire ballroom seem to stop and listen. Before I could say another word to my ex-husband or his smug wife, a small figure in a white tulle dress burst through the crowd of guests directly toward our table. "Mommy, Dad and I have been looking everywhere for you." Zuri's voice cut through the heavy air of the ballroom. She was a vision in her white tulle dress with small silk petals sewn into the skirt. Her natural curls were pinned back with a sparkly clip, and her face was lit up with pure, absolute joy. She threw her little arms around my waist, burying her face into the fabric of my emerald gown. I immediately placed my hand on her back, absorbing the warmth of my beautiful daughter. I looked up and watched the exact moment the realization hit Jamal. The smug, arrogant smirk melted completely off his face, leaving behind a pale blank mask of pure shock. He stared at Zuri and then stared at me as the mental math clicked into place in his brain. A 7-year-old child, 8 years since the divorce. He had drained my bank account and walked out the door, leaving me in total ruin. 2 weeks after he packed his bags and abandoned me, I found out I was pregnant. I had navigated the severe nausea, the terrifying doctor appointments, and the overwhelming fear of impending motherhood entirely on my own. He never knew, because he had blocked my number, changed his email, and completely erased me from his world to chase Chloe and her high society lifestyle. Now he was staring at the living, breathing proof of the family he threw away. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Chloe dropped her hand from his arm, her perfectly arched eyebrows pulling together in confusion. Before Jamal could process the shock, a tall shadow fell over us. Elias stepped up behind Zuri, placing a gentle, warm hand on the small of my back. My husband was a man who commanded a room simply by existing in it. He was wearing an understated bespoke navy suit crafted from Italian wool, a garment that carried no flashy logos, but spoke volumes to anyone who truly understood generational wealth. Elias looked down at Zuri with a soft, adoring smile. "We managed to locate the chocolate strawberries," Elias said, his deep voice carrying a quiet, unquestionable authority. "Though I had to negotiate with the catering staff to secure the last two." Zuri giggled and reached up, grabbing Elias by the hand. "You are the best, Dad," she announced proudly. Jamal stared at Zuri again, his face tightening. "How old is she?" "7," I answered. His eyes snapped toward mine. "Maya, is she mine?" I held his gaze. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after you disappeared. I tried to reach you, but you had blocked my number, changed your email, and erased me from your life. Elias did not replace you, Jamal. He became the father who actually showed up." Jamal opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The word "dad" hit Jamal like a physical blow. He blinked rapidly, shaking his head as if trying to clear away a sudden fog. The vulnerability on his face lasted for exactly 3 seconds before his fragile ego violently reasserted itself. He straightened his posture, tugging at the lapels of his shiny suit, and let out a forced, breathy laugh. He looked Elias up and down, taking in the lack of a massive diamond watch, and assuming my husband was just another working-class guy trying to stay afloat. "So you found a replacement to play house?" Jamal sneered, his voice dripping with renewed arrogance. "I guess I should not be surprised. You always needed someone to lean on, Maya." He looked at Elias with a look of mock sympathy. "Good luck, man. I carried her financial burdens for 3 years. I hope you have a solid credit score, because she will drag you straight into bankruptcy with her poverty mindset. She never knew how to handle money or fit into a real professional circle." Elias did not raise his voice or show a single ounce of intimidation. He simply looked at Jamal with the mild, detached curiosity of a person observing a bug on the sidewalk. But before Elias could deliver a response, a loud, sharp clapping sound interrupted us. "Excuse me, we need to clear this area immediately." Jessica marched toward us, wielding a silver clipboard like a weapon. She was Chloe's sister-in-law, a white woman with a severe blonde bob and a wireless headset tucked into her ear. Jessica had firmly appointed herself as the unofficial coordinator of my cousin Kendra's wedding. She thrived on asserting dominance over people she deemed beneath her social class, and right now she had her sights locked entirely on me. "Maya, we have a slight problem," Jessica announced loudly, making sure the guests standing near the champagne tower could hear every single word. "There has been a necessary adjustment to the seating chart. We had to make room to accommodate actual VIP guests near the bridal party. Your seats have been moved." I kept my expression perfectly neutral. "Moved to where, Jessica?" She pointed her pen toward the far back corner of the grand ballroom. "Right over there, table 42. I looked to where she was pointing. Table 42 was a tiny, cramped, circular table shoved aggressively close to the swinging wooden doors of the venue kitchen. It was the worst seat in the entire estate. Waiters were rushing in, carrying massive trays of food and dirty dishes directly past the chairs. The noise of clattering silverware and shouting kitchen staff was completely unavoidable. It was an intentional public demotion designed to humiliate me in front of my ex-husband. Chloe covered her mouth, feigning a look of tragic pity. "Oh, Maya, that is such a shame," Chloe said sweetly. "But I am sure you are used to the noise of a commercial kitchen. It will probably feel just like the old days when you were waiting tables downtown." Jessica smirked, writing something on her clipboard. "It really is for the best, Maya. You always struggled to fit into high-class spaces. It is just like that beautiful downtown condo you used to live in." Jessica leaned in closer, her voice carrying a vicious edge. You spent 3 years doing manual labor putting up drywall and installing hardwood floors to fix that place up. And then you could not even afford a cheap lawyer during the divorce to fight for it. You just let Jamal legally walk away with the entire property. You always were better at serving than owning. I felt Elias tense beside me. The muscles in his arm turned to absolute stone. My husband was a man who fired arrogant executives before his morning coffee, and he was not going to stand there and let this woman speak to me like a stray dog. He took half a step forward, his eyes locking onto Jessica with a cold, terrifying intensity. I immediately placed my hand flat against his chest, gently pressing him back. I looked up into his eyes and gave him a tiny, reassuring shake of my head. I did not want him to intervene. I did not want to cause a screaming match and ruin my cousin's beautiful wedding reception. More importantly, I knew something that Jamal, Chloe, and Jessica did not know. I knew exactly who owned the ground they were currently standing on. "It is perfectly fine, Jessica," I said, my voice smooth and untouched by her venom. "Table 42 will be absolutely lovely. Come on, Zuri, let us go sit down." I took my daughter by the hand and gracefully turned my back on the three of them. I led my family across this ballroom, navigating past the beautiful floral centerpieces and the elegantly dressed guests, until we reached the cramped, dark corner by the kitchen. Elias pulled my chair out for me, brushing a quick kiss against my temple before sitting down beside me. Zuri happily colored on a paper napkin, completely oblivious to the intense social warfare happening above her head. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, a rush of hot air and the smell of industrial dish soap washed over us. It was humiliating, and it was meant to be. I looked across the vast expanse of the ballroom. Jamal and Chloe had taken their seats at the prime VIP table located right next to the massive dance floor. The lighting over their table was perfect. Jamal caught my eye from across the room. He lifted his crystal flute of expensive champagne, looking straight at me, and offered a slow, mocking toast. Chloe leaned against him, laughing behind her hand. They looked at me with sheer, unadulterated pity. They firmly believed they had won. They thought they had successfully put the exhausted charity case back in her proper place at the bottom of the social ladder. I picked up my water glass and smiled graciously back at them, taking a slow, calm sip. They were so busy gloating and reveling in their perceived superiority. They were so completely focused on my humiliation that they were completely unaware of who was currently rushing out of the swinging kitchen doors right behind them. The heavy wooden kitchen doors directly behind my chair suddenly burst open. A rush of frantic energy spilled out into the dining area, carrying the intense heat of commercial ovens and the sharp scent of roasted garlic. It was not a waiter carrying a tray of dirty dishes. It was the general manager of the estate. He was a distinguished older gentleman dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, but right now his face was flushed red, and he was practically sprinting across the polished hardwood floor. From across the vast expanse of the ballroom, I could see Jamal watching this unfold. He leaned back in his plush chair at the VIP table, swirling his expensive champagne with a look of supreme anticipation. I knew exactly what was running through his mind. He saw the manager storming toward our overflow table and fully expected me to be publicly scolded. He probably thought Elias and I had somehow violated the venue rules, or that the management was coming to demand we move our chairs further out of the way of the serving staff. Jamal lived for these moments of public degradation. He desperately wanted to see me humiliated enough to finally break that calm, serene smile I had maintained since he cornered me at the champagne tower. The general manager stopped dead in his tracks the moment he reached table 42. He did not yell. He did not ask us to move our chairs. Instead, all the color drained completely out of his face, leaving him looking like he had just seen a ghost. He looked at me, then looked at the terrible location of our cramped table, and a look of absolute horror washed over his features. He immediately snapped his feet together and bowed deeply, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. When he straightened back up, his hands were visibly trembling against his dark suit jacket. "Madam CEO," he stammered, his voice shaking so badly he could barely get the words out. "Please accept my deepest apologies. I had no earthly idea you were already in the building. Why in the world are you sitting here by the service doors?" The owner's suite has been entirely prepared and staffed for your family upstairs. We have a private balcony, a dedicated catering team, and customized desserts waiting for your beautiful daughter. I am so incredibly sorry for this monumental oversight. The general manager was sweating profusely. His name tag read David, but I knew his full professional resume. He was a seasoned hospitality veteran who had managed five-star luxury properties across the globe. Yet here he was, shaking like a leaf because he understood exactly who I was and what I owned. He knew that the ground he was standing on, the very historical estate hosting this spectacular wedding, was simply one single asset in my massive commercial real estate portfolio. I had purchased this venue 3 years ago when it was facing foreclosure. I poured millions of dollars into restoring the grand ballroom, upgrading the botanical grounds, and turning it into the most exclusive, highly sought-after event space in all of Atlanta. I smiled warmly at him, making sure my voice was soothing and calm to ease his sheer panic. "David, please breathe," I said, keeping my tone gentle and reassuring. "You have done absolutely nothing wrong. The staff is doing a wonderful job tonight. The appetizers are fantastic and the venue looks absolutely beautiful. You should be very proud of your entire team." He wiped a heavy bead of sweat from his forehead, pulling a crisp white handkerchief from his breast pocket. "But Madam CEO," he protested, lowering his voice so the surrounding tables would not overhear our conversation. "You are the sole owner of this entire estate. You cannot sit here next to the kitchen exhaust. Jessica from the bridal party gave us the final seating chart, and we assumed your table was placed in the front near the bridal party. If I had known she pushed you back into this dark corner, I would have intervened immediately. Please let me escort you and your family up to the suite. It is quiet, it is comfortable, and you will have the absolute best view of the entire reception." I reached out and gently patted his arm. "I truly appreciate the generous offer, David," I said. "But tonight is not about me or my real estate company. Tonight is entirely about my cousin Kendra. She has planned this beautiful wedding for months, and the last thing I want to do is disrupt her seating chart or pull any focus from her big day. If I move to the owner suite, people will notice. They will start asking questions. The attention will shift away from the bride, and I absolutely refuse to let my business shadow her joy. We are perfectly fine right here. My daughter is enjoying her coloring book, and my husband and I are just happy to celebrate with our family." Elias nodded in agreement, giving the nervous manager a reassuring and confident smile. "We are having a great time, David," Elias added, his voice a deep, calming rumble. "Do not worry about us for a second. Just make sure the bride and groom are completely taken care of tonight. You are running a beautiful event." David looked between us, his panic slowly dissolving into profound professional respect. He realized we were not going to fire him for Jessica's petty, malicious seating assignments. He bowed his head once more, placing his hand respectfully over his heart. "Your grace is unmatched, Madam CEO," he said quietly. "I will ensure your table receives our absolute best service tonight. I will personally handle bringing out your dinner courses. If there is anything you need, anything at all, please do not hesitate to ask me directly." I thanked him graciously, and he turned around, disappearing back through the swinging kitchen doors with a renewed sense of purpose and relief. The entire interaction had taken less than 2 minutes. It was a quiet, discreet exchange of immense authority and profound respect. There was no yelling, no grandstanding, just the quiet reality of who I actually was and the power I held in this space. But from across the massive ballroom, Jamal had watched the entire thing unfold through a completely distorted and arrogant lens. The live jazz band had transitioned into a loud, upbeat dance number. The booming brass section and the heavy rhythm bass echoed off the high vaulted ceilings, making it entirely impossible to hear normal conversations from more than a few feet away. Jamal, sitting comfortably at his premium VIP table, had only seen the visual pantomime of the exchange. He saw the manager rush over looking frantic and upset. I saw the deep bow, which to his arrogant mind probably looked like the manager leaning down to aggressively deliver a stern warning. He saw my polite refusal and David wiping sweat from his face as if he were frustrated by a difficult guest. In Jamal's twisted reality, there was only one possible explanation for a manager to approach a wedding guest like that. He assumed the venue was harassing me about money. I could see the gears turning in his head from 50 feet away. He remembered that Kendra had requested all wedding gifts be processed through a digital registry fund to help pay for her upcoming honeymoon trip to Europe. Jamal, firmly convinced that I was still living paycheck to paycheck, immediately assumed that my credit card had declined when I tried to make a contribution. I thought the manager had come out to quietly inform me that my payment was rejected and that I was causing a logistical financial problem for the venue staff. A greedy, triumphant gleam sparked in Jamal's eyes. This was exactly the scenario he had been waiting for all evening. He wanted to be the wealthy savior swooping in to rescue his pathetic, struggling ex-wife in front of a room full of elite guests. He wanted Elias to feel completely emasculated and powerless to help his own family. He wanted to prove once and for all that without his logistics money, I was absolutely nothing. Jamal patted Chloe on the hand, stood up from his premium velvet seat, and buttoned his expensive suit jacket. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a thick, heavy wad of cash. I watched him strut across the ballroom floor. His walk was full of exaggerated swagger, his chin tilted up toward the crystal chandeliers. He navigated past the dancing couples and the elegantly dressed guests, heading straight for our cramped little table by the kitchen doors. Zuri briefly looked up from her coloring book following the strange man before returning to her crayons. He was so incredibly eager to humiliate me. He had no idea he was walking directly into a trap that would cost him everything. Jamal reached our overflow table with the exaggerated swagger of a man who firmly believed his own delusions. The heavy wooden kitchen doors swung open behind him, releasing another wave of intense heat and the sharp clatter of industrial dishwashers. But Jamal did not seem to notice or care about the awful location. He was entirely focused on the performance he was about to deliver. He stood over our small circular table, casting a long dark shadow across Zuri's coloring book. My beautiful daughter did not even look up. She was completely absorbed in shading a picture of a princess, happily humming a little song under her breath. Jamal completely ignored his own child. He did not ask her name. He did not offer a gentle smile or a moment of curiosity. His eyes were locked entirely on me, burning with a toxic mixture of triumph and sheer arrogance. He reached into his tailored jacket and slammed a thick stack of $100 bills directly onto the center of our table. The loud smack of his hand against the wood made our silverware rattle. Several guests sitting at the nearby overflow tables stopped their conversations and turned to watch the commotion. That was exactly what Jamal wanted. He craved an audience. He desperately needed everyone in our immediate vicinity to witness him playing the role of the benevolent, wealthy savior, swooping in to rescue his pathetic, struggling ex-wife. "I saw the manager come over here," Jamal announced, raising his voice significantly, so the older couple sitting at the next table would hear every single word. "You do not have to pretend with me. I know exactly how these things work." Kendra requested cash contributions for her honeymoon fund through the digital registry, and I am guessing your credit card was declined. It is incredibly embarrassing for the venue management to have to track you down in the middle of the reception to settle a bounced payment. He tapped his index finger against the stack of bills lying next to my water glass. "Take it," he demanded, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "Seriously, Maya, just take the cash and pay the manager whatever fees you owe them. I know how badly you want to keep up appearances and pretend you belong at an elegant estate wedding like this," Jamal continued, leaning closer. "But you do not have to humiliate yourself or stress out the venue staff. My logistics firm just signed a massive multi-million-dollar warehouse lease in the city, so dropping a little spare change to bail out my poor ex-wife is absolutely nothing to me. Consider it a charitable donation." I did not flinch. I did not reach for the money, and I certainly did not break my calm, polite smile. I simply stared at the crumpled bills sitting on the white linen tablecloth. It was almost poetic. 8 years ago, he had stolen my life savings to fund his escape, and now he was throwing a few $100s at me like I was a beggar on the street. When I did not immediately burst into grateful tears or shrink away in shame, Jamal shifted his aggressive attention toward my husband. Elias was sitting beside me, perfectly relaxed, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. His posture was open but guarded, radiating the quiet, dangerous stillness of a sleeping lion. Jamal sneered at him, taking in Elias's understated navy suit and clearly assuming that a man who did not wear flashy designer labels must be financially beneath him. "You are going to learn a very hard lesson about this woman," Jamal said, speaking to Elias as if they were two men sharing a miserable secret. "She always had a terrible habit of biting off far more than she could chew financially. She has this pathetic poverty mindset where she desperately wants to live a luxury lifestyle, but she completely lacks the drive and the intellect to actually afford it. I had to carry her for years," Jamal lied smoothly, placing his hands on his hips. "I exhausted myself trying to build a foundation for us, while she dragged her feet and complained about every single bill. It drained the life out of me. I had to leave her behind just to protect my own future." The sheer magnitude of his gaslighting was breathtaking. He stood there rewriting our entire history with absolute confidence. He painted himself as the long-suffering provider and cast me as the greedy, incompetent burden. He conveniently erased the memory of my blistered feet after pulling back-to-back shifts at the diner. I erased the image of me sitting at our cheap kitchen table surrounded by overdue electric bills because he had used my paycheck to buy himself a custom-tailored interview suit. He erased the fact that he walked out on a loyal wife who had literally starved herself so he could finish his business degree without having to take out student loans. The audacity of his lies would have broken me a decade ago. It would have sent me spiraling into a desperate defensive panic trying to prove my worth and beg for the truth to be recognized by anyone who would listen. But I was a grown woman now. A woman who had taken the $42 he left me and built a commercial real estate empire from the ground up. I knew my truth, and his pathetic attempt to rewrite history meant absolutely nothing to my reality. I felt Elias shift beside me, but I kept my hand firmly over his, signaling him to let Jamal keep digging his own grave. Jamal puffed out his chest, leaning his knuckles on our table to invade our personal space. He looked Elias dead in the eye, wanting to assert ultimate dominance over the man who had replaced him. "You seem like a decent guy," Jamal continued, dripping with condescension. "But you need to understand the reality of the burden you married. She will drag you down to her level. You cannot elevate someone who is comfortable at the bottom." Meanwhile, I am sitting at the VIP table tonight because my company Horizon Logistics is moving freight across the entire eastern seaboard. I negotiate contracts worth more than you will probably earn in your entire lifetime. So take the cash, man. Pay off whatever debt she just racked up with the venue manager, and maybe use the leftover change to buy her a better dress. She looks ridiculous trying to fit in here. Elias did not react to the insult. He did not raise his voice or puff out his chest the way Jamal did. He simply took a slow sip of his sparkling water and set the glass down on the table with a soft, deliberate clink. He reached out and gently rested his large, warm hand over mine, intertwining our fingers. He casually glanced down at the stack of $100 bills Jamal had slapped on the table and then looked back up at Jamal's sweating face. Elias's expression was incredibly calm, carrying the mild amusement of a predator watching its prey wander blindly into a snare. "Horizon Logistics," Elias said, his deep voice smooth and perfectly measured. "That is certainly an ambitious mid-level freight operation. I read the quarterly reports recently. It is my understanding that Apex Holdings announced its acquisition of Horizon Logistics last week. If I am not mistaken, the transaction is scheduled to close tonight." Jamal's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second, clearly surprised that Elias knew the specific corporate details of the recent merger. But Jamal quickly recovered, letting out a loud, hysterical laugh that echoed over the background music and the clattering kitchen doors. He threw his head back, mocking Elias with dramatic theatrical flair, designed to draw even more attention from the surrounding tables. "Oh, wow!" Jamal chuckled, shaking his head and pointing a finger at Elias. "So you read a press release on the internet, and now you want to pretend you know the big leagues. That is adorable, man." "Yes, Apex Holdings is acquiring us. They recognized top-tier talent when they saw my division. Once the deal closes, I will be one of their most valuable executive assets. Do not try to impress me with Google searches, buddy. You are way out of your depth. You have no idea how the corporate world actually operates at my level." Jamal threw his head back and let out a loud theatrical laugh that scraped against my ears. The sound was incredibly forced and entirely designed to draw the attention of the surrounding guests. He looked around the room, hoping to find an audience of admiring onlookers who would join him in mocking the man sitting beside me. Jamal genuinely believed he had just delivered the ultimate verbal finishing move. He stood there puffing out his chest, wrapped in his expensive tailored suit, absolutely convinced that Elias was nothing more than a pathetic imposter trying to save face in front of a wealthy superior. He looked down at my husband with a gaze so entirely saturated in contempt and pity that it actually made my stomach turn. Chloe tightened her grip on Jamal's arm, letting out another high-pitched giggle that completely matched his arrogant energy. She looked at Elias with utter disdain, heavily rolling her eyes, as if my husband was a small child who had just told a ridiculous lie. She leaned her head against Jamal's shoulder, resting her manicured hand flat against his chest to showcase her massive diamond engagement ring. "It is okay, baby," Chloe purred loud enough for the adjacent tables to hear. "Let him pretend. When you are sitting at the absolute bottom of the food chain, you have to make up little fantasies to help you sleep at night. Just leave the poor guy alone. He is already struggling enough having to take care of Maya and her baggage." I sat perfectly still, feeling the solid, reassuring warmth of Elias right beside me. 8 years ago, Jamal's loud, domineering behavior would have sent me into a total panic. I used to shrink myself down to make room for his massive, fragile ego. Whenever he felt threatened or insecure, he would raise his voice and humiliate me until he felt powerful again. But watching him try to execute that exact same psychological manipulation on Elias was like watching a toddler try to intimidate a mountain. Elias did not flinch. He did not raise his voice to match Jamal's aggressive volume. He did not stand up or puff out his chest to prove his masculinity. He simply sat there radiating a quiet, dangerous stillness that immediately made the air around our cramped little table feel 10 degrees colder. Elias casually reached into the inner pocket of his understated navy suit. His movements were slow and deliberately measured. He pulled out a sleek, matte black smartphone and unlocked the screen with a quick glance. He did not look angry or insulted. He looked mildly bored. He rested his elbows on the white linen tablecloth, holding the phone loosely in his right hand. He tapped the screen twice, navigating through a highly secured application that required a secondary biometric authentication. The soft blue light from the digital display illuminated his calm, chiseled features. "That is incredibly strange," Elias said, his deep voice cutting through the loud reception music with absolute surgical precision. He did not shout, but his tone carried a commanding weight that instantly wiped the arrogant smile right off Jamal's face. Elias scrolled his thumb down the screen, his eyes scanning a lengthy encrypted document. "I am looking right at the internal restructuring manifest for the Apex Holdings integration. I see the supply chain consolidation protocols. I see the warehouse leasing agreements you were just bragging about. But I do not recall approving a vice president retention bonus for you in the latest acquisition audit." The immediate silence that fell over our small corner of the ballroom was deafening. Jamal's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His posture instantly deflated. The cocky, exaggerated swagger he had carried over from the VIP table evaporated into thin air. He blinked rapidly, staring down at Elias with a sudden, intense confusion. He tried to quickly process what he had just heard, but his brain was clearly struggling to catch up. He assumed Elias was just throwing around meaningless corporate buzzwords, but the specific phrasing my husband used struck a very deep, very terrifying nerve. "What the hell are you talking about?" Jamal demanded, his voice dropping an entire octave. The mocking laughter was completely gone. A tiny sliver of genuine panic began to bleed into his tone. "You do not know anything about my retention bonus. That is highly classified internal documentation. Only the upper executive board at Apex Holdings has access to those integration files. You are completely bluffing. You are just throwing out big words to sound smart in front of my ex-wife. It is a pathetic trick, man." Elias did not even look up from his phone screen. He simply continued to scroll, reading the classified data aloud with terrifying accuracy. "Your division currently manages 32 commercial freight routes across the eastern seaboard," Elias stated calmly. "Last quarter, your specific branch reported an 8% deficit in operational efficiency due to severe mismanagement of the automated sorting facilities. During the pre-closing integration review this week, Apex Holdings identified several positions for possible restructuring once the acquisition became final. Specifically, Tier 3 executives who failed to meet their annual logistical quotas. You fall directly into that tier, Jamal. Jamal took a sudden involuntary step backward. He bumped into a passing waiter who was carrying a tray of empty champagne flutes, causing the glass to clatter loudly. But Jamal did not even turn around to apologize. He was entirely paralyzed. His eyes were wide and his breathing had become noticeably shallow. The specific operational deficit numbers Elias just recited out loud were not available on any public press release. They were not published on any financial blogs or industry websites. Those exact figures were part of a strictly confidential internal audit that Jamal had been desperately trying to hide from his new corporate overlords. Chloe looked back and forth between the two men, her perfectly sculpted face twisting into a mask of total confusion. She could feel the sudden rigid tension radiating from Jamal's body. She tugged aggressively on his suit sleeve, trying to pull his attention back to her. "Baby, what is he talking about?" Chloe asked, her voice shrill and demanding. "Tell him to shut up. He does not know what he is talking about. Just tell him he is lying and let us go back to our table. I do not want to stand next to the kitchen anymore. It smells like grease." Jamal completely ignored his wife. A thick bead of sweat formed at his temple and slowly rolled down the side of his face. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his tight silk collar. "How do you know those numbers?" Jamal whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of sheer terror and absolute disbelief. "Who gave you that information? That is protected corporate data. Are you an auditor? Do you work in the accounting department for Apex?" Elias finally looked up from his phone. He did not smile. He simply extended his hand, turning the bright screen of his smartphone outward so Jamal could see it clearly. Elias tilted the device just enough for the digital display to be fully visible to the man standing over our table. I watched Jamal lean forward, his eyes squinting to read the glowing screen. I knew exactly what he was looking at. He was looking at the proprietary, highly classified executive dashboard for Apex Holdings. It was an elite digital interface that only the highest-ranking board members possessed. It featured the official company watermark, strict security clearances, and a direct live feed of the ongoing corporate restructuring pipeline. Right at the very top of the screen, in bold, undeniably clear lettering, was Elias's full legal name listed under the title of chairman of the board. The color drained entirely from Jamal's face. His skin turned a sickening shade of ash gray. His jaw went completely slack, dropping open in sheer, unadulterated horror. The man who had strutted over to our table to throw petty cash in my face suddenly looked like he was about to vomit directly onto the white linen tablecloth. His knees visibly buckled slightly under the crushing weight of his monumental mistake. I had just spent the last 5 minutes aggressively insulting, belittling, and threatening the man who owned the company that signed his paychecks. He had just bragged about his massive executive wealth to the single individual who held the absolute power to terminate his career with one simple phone call. Elias pulled the phone back and casually slipped it into his suit pocket. "You should really pay closer attention to who exactly is acquiring your assets," Jamal Elias said, his voice low and incredibly smooth. "Arrogance is a very expensive luxury in the corporate world, especially for someone sitting in a redundant middle management position." Jamal could not breathe. He was actively hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his expensive tailored suit. He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading, desperately searching for a lifeline. He wanted me to say something to defuse the situation, to explain that this was all just a massive misunderstanding. But I simply sat there, keeping my hands folded neatly in my lap, offering him the exact same cold, silent pity he had shown me 8 years ago when he abandoned me to starve. I let him drown in the terrifying reality of his own making. Chloe, oblivious to the catastrophic career implosion happening right in front of her, let out a loud, frustrated sigh. She forcefully yanked on Jamal's arm, breaking his paralyzed stare. "This is ridiculous," Chloe snapped, glaring down at me with pure venom. "I am not standing here and letting these nobodies ruin our night. You are being completely ridiculous, Jamal. Let us go." Before Jamal could find his voice to speak, a sudden booming sound echoed through the entire grand ballroom. The live jazz band immediately stopped playing their instruments, cutting the music off in a sharp, dramatic pause. The heavy feedback of a microphone switching on crackled through the massive speakers positioned around the room. The venue lighting shifted, dimming the perimeter lights and bringing a bright, warm spotlight down directly onto the center of the polished dance floor. Ladies and gentlemen, the wedding DJ announced, his energetic voice filling the massive space and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. If I could please have everyone's absolute attention, we are going to pause the music for just a few moments. It is time for our open toast segment of the evening. If any of our lovely guests would like to come up and share a few beautiful words, a quick memory, or a blessing for our stunning bride and groom, please make your way to the front of the stage right now. Let us show Kendra and her new husband some serious love tonight. The crowd erupted into polite, supportive applause. Guests began clinking their crystal glasses together, creating a beautiful chiming sound that rang throughout the elegant estate. I watched the realization spark in Chloe's eyes. She completely ignored her husband's pale, sweating, terrified face. She saw an opportunity to snatch the spotlight, an opportunity to publicly assert her dominance and humiliate me in front of hundreds of elite guests. She aggressively let go of Jamal's arms, smoothed down the front of her inappropriate silk gown, and began marching directly toward the stage with a vicious, predetermined smile on her face. The music faded into a soft instrumental hum as the wedding DJ stepped back from his podium, gesturing toward the center of the polished oak dance floor. A handsome groomsman in a tailored tuxedo had just stepped forward to deliver the first toast, holding a silver microphone and a glass of champagne. But Chloe was already moving. She practically sprinted across the ballroom, her champagne-colored silk gown trailing behind her like a royal cape. She shoved past a group of elderly aunts and completely bypassed the designated speaking order. Before the groomsman could even utter his first syllable, Chloe reached out with her manicured hand and aggressively snatched the microphone right out of his grip. The groomsman stumbled back, blinking in total confusion. Chloe did not apologize. She did not even acknowledge him. She marched to the absolute center of the dance floor, positioning herself directly under the largest crystal chandelier, so the light would catch the massive diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. She tapped the microphone twice. The sharp, heavy thud echoed through the massive estate, immediately silencing the low hum of conversation. Hundreds of elegantly dressed guests turned their attention toward her, expecting a warm greeting or a funny story about the bride. I watched her from my seat at the overflow table by the kitchen doors. Elias gently rubbed his thumb across my knuckles, keeping me incredibly grounded. Zuri was happily coloring, completely shielded from the malice radiating across the room. Chloe raised her crystal glass high into the air, flashing a brilliant, perfectly rehearsed smile toward my cousin Kendra and her new husband. To the beautiful bride and groom, Chloe announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. We are all so incredibly thrilled to be here tonight to witness the start of your journey. Marriage is a beautiful, powerful institution. It requires ultimate dedication, sacrifice, and most importantly, vision. She paused, letting the word vision hang in the air. Her eyes immediately broke away from the bridal party and snapped directly across the room, locking onto me. Her smile sharpened into a vicious, deadly blade. You see, finding the right partner is absolutely everything. Chloe continued, pacing slowly across the floor like a motivational speaker giving a corporate keynote address. The wrong partner can anchor you to the bottom of the ocean. They can drain your spirit, limit your potential, and trap you in a life of absolute mediocrity. But the right partner can elevate you to the stars. She was not toasting the bride anymore. She was delivering a public execution disguised as an inspirational anecdote. The guests sitting at the tables nearest to the dance floor began to shift uncomfortably in their velvet seats. A few people exchanged confused, nervous glances. My Aunt Clara narrowed her eyes, crossing her arms over her chest. They could all feel the sudden toxic shift in the atmosphere, but Chloe was entirely oblivious to the heavy social discomfort she was actively causing. She was too heavily intoxicated by her own perceived dominance to read the room. I look at my wonderful husband Jamal, sitting right over there, Chloe crooned, pointing her champagne flute toward the VIP table. Jamal was still sitting exactly where Elias had verbally dismantled him, pale, sweating, and completely paralyzed by the horrifying realization that his career was over. But Chloe did not notice his sheer terror. She only saw the wealthy, powerful executive she thought she had married. 8 years ago, Jamal was drowning. Chloe declared, her voice carrying a dramatic, theatrical weight. I was a brilliant, ambitious man with massive corporate dreams, but he was trapped. He was chained to a stagnant, unambitious woman who could not comprehend his massive vision. She was perfectly content with a small, miserable life. She lacked the basic intellect to understand wealth and the class to navigate high society. She expected a king to live like a peasant just to make her feel secure in her own profound inadequacy. A collective gasp rippled through the older relatives sitting near the front. Kendra, my beautiful cousin, looked absolutely horrified. She started to stand up from the sweetheart table, ready to intervene and stop this madness. But I caught her eye across the room and offered a small, calming shake of my head. I wanted Chloe to keep talking. I wanted her to put every single one of her delusions on public display. I remember the exact night I saved him. Chloe boasted, her voice echoing through the silent, horrified ballroom. He came to me exhausted from carrying the financial and emotional burden of a partner who contributed absolutely nothing to his future. I had to step in and rescue him from that pathetic, exhausted charity case. I had to show him what a real high-value woman looked like, and look at what we have built together since then. She placed a manicured hand over her heart, feigning deep emotional pride. While his bitter ex-wife was busy wallowing in her poverty mindset, I was utilizing elite investment strategies to build our empire. I am the one who diversified our portfolio. I am the one who managed our luxury assets and secured our offshore accounts. I introduced him to the right social circles and elevated him to the executive board. Without my sophisticated financial guidance and my brilliant business acumen, he would still be stuck in a cheap, cramped downtown apartment trying to support a useless stepping stone. Chloe took a slow, arrogant sip of her champagne, basking in the dead silence of the room. She genuinely believed the crowd was quiet out of sheer awe and respect. She thought she was delivering a masterclass in female empowerment. In reality, she was publicly admitting to financial manipulation while actively ruining a wedding reception just to feed her massive insecurities. I am sharing this story today for the bride. Chloe continued, turning her attention back to Kendra with a condescending smile. Because I want you to know that true love is about building an empire. It is about leaving behind the dead weight and upgrading your life without any apologies. So here is to knowing your worth, and here is to never ever settling for someone who belongs at the bottom. She lowered her glass, expecting a round of roaring applause. Instead, the ballroom was engulfed in a suffocating, deafening silence. Not a single person clapped. Nobody raised their glass. The musicians on the stage looked incredibly uncomfortable, staring down at their polished shoes. The wedding guests sat frozen, staring at Chloe in absolute disbelief. The sheer lack of social awareness, the blatant cruelty of hijacking a wedding toast to attack an ex-wife was simply too much for anyone to process. At the VIP table, Jessica, Chloe's sister-in-law, sat with a smug, satisfied grin, firmly believing they had just won the ultimate victory. Jamal, on the other hand, looked like he was going to pass out. He stared at the floor, his hands shaking so violently he had to hide them under the white linen tablecloth. He knew Elias held his entire corporate future in the palm of his hand, and his wife had just spent 5 minutes aggressively insulting my family on an open microphone. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the heavy silence stretch out for 10 agonizing seconds. I felt Elias's hand gently squeeze my shoulder, a silent, steady anchor of absolute support. I did not feel a single ounce of anger or humiliation. I felt pure clinical clarity. Chloe had just handed me the perfect weapon on a silver platter, and she had provided an audience of 300 elite guests to witness her upcoming destruction. I reached down and picked up my crisp white cloth napkin. I dabbed the corners of my mouth with slow, deliberate precision. I set the napkin neatly beside my plate, pushed my chair back, and stood up. The scraping sound of my wooden chair moving across the floor echoed loudly in the quiet room, drawing every single eye toward my dark corner by the kitchen doors. I smoothed the front of my emerald green dress, ensuring my posture was absolutely flawless. I did not rush. I did not storm across the room with a scowl on my face. I walked with the slow, confident elegance of a woman who owned the very ground she walked on. The guests parted like the Red Sea as I moved through the tables. I kept my head high, offering polite, warm smiles to my aunts and uncles as I passed them. Chloe stood frozen in the center of the dance floor. Her triumphant smile faltered slightly as she watched me approach. She expected me to run out the back doors in tears. She certainly did not expect me to walk directly toward her with a look of serene, untouchable confidence. I stepped onto the edge of the polished wooden dance floor and walked straight up to the stunned groomsman who was still standing awkwardly near the podium. I reached out and gently placed my hand over the microphone Chloe was holding. She tried to grip it tighter, her knuckles turning white, but I simply locked eyes with her and offered a smile so cold it could freeze boiling water. "Thank you for sharing, Chloe," I said, my voice soft but incredibly firm. "I will take it from here." She stared at me, completely paralyzed by my lack of fear, and slowly her fingers loosened. I took the silver microphone from her trembling hand, turned my back to her, and faced the silent, waiting crowd. It was time to pull the curtain down on her grand, spectacular illusion. The silver microphone felt heavy and cool against my palm. A soft hum of feedback echoed through the massive speakers, and then the grand ballroom descended into an absolute suffocating silence. 300 pairs of eyes were locked entirely on me. I could see my Aunt Clara holding her breath in the front row. I could see the professional string quartet frozen in their chairs, holding their bows rigidly above their instruments. And standing just 2 feet away from me, completely paralyzed in the harsh glare of the center spotlight, was Chloe. She had expected a fight. She had desperately wanted a loud, dramatic screaming match to prove to the elite guests that I was the bitter, unstable ex-wife she had just described. She wanted me to lose my composure so she could play the elegant victim. Instead, I offered her nothing but profound, terrifying calmness. I did not glare at her. I simply turned my body away and directed my attention toward the sweetheart table where my beautiful cousin was sitting. "Kendra," I began, my voice ringing out clear and steady across the massive estate. "You look absolutely breathtaking tonight. And Marcus, you are a truly lucky man. I want to take a moment to genuinely congratulate both of you on finding a real, authentic partnership. Marriage is not about finding someone to rescue you. It is not about elevating your social status or treating a human being like a corporate stepping stone. True marriage is about standing shoulder to shoulder in the dark trenches. It is about loyalty, respect, and building a foundation that cannot be shaken by greed or superficial illusions. I wish you both a lifetime of profound peace and unwavering trust. May you always protect each other, exactly the way my incredible husband Elias protects me." A collective sigh of relief washed over the ballroom. Several guests nodded and a few people offered soft murmurs of agreement. Kendra smiled at me with tears pooling in her eyes, mouthing the words "thank you" from across the room. I had successfully completely shifted the toxic energy Chloe had injected into the room, back to a place of celebration and love. I had proven that I possessed the class and grace that Chloe fundamentally lacked. But I was not finished. I was nowhere near finished. I turned slowly on the heels of my emerald dress, pivoting back toward the center of the dance floor. Chloe had taken a tentative step backward, trying to retreat into the safety of the crowd, but the bright spotlight held her firmly in place. I looked directly at her and let a soft, appreciative smile touch my lips. "However, I think we all owe Chloe a massive round of applause," I said, my voice projecting smoothly through the sound system. "She just delivered an incredibly inspiring story." Chloe blinked rapidly. She looked toward the VIP table where Jamal was still sitting frozen in his chair, recovering from the absolute terror Elias had just inflicted upon him. Chloe did not understand my strategy. She thought I was surrendering. She thought I was bowing down to her public dominance and admitting defeat. A tiny arrogant smirk began to creep back onto her perfectly contoured face. She lifted her chin, ready to accept my public submission. "You spoke so passionately about your elite investment strategies, Chloe." I continued pacing slowly across the polished wood, just as she had done minutes earlier. "You spoke about how you personally rescued Jamal's finances, how you diversified his portfolio, and how your brilliant business acumen secured his wealth. It is truly remarkable to see a wife take such a proactive, deeply involved role in managing her husband's executive assets." Jamal nodded from his seat at the VIP table, puffing his chest out slightly. Despite the lingering panic from Elias exposing his corporate failures, Jamal's ego simply could not resist a public compliment about his wealth. He firmly believed I was finally acknowledging his superior status. In fact, I went on my tone, conversational and light. I was just discussing your impressive financial strategies with my husband Elias earlier this evening. You see, Elias's holding company handles massive corporate acquisitions. When they conduct a top-down financial audit of a new logistics subsidiary, they look at every single ledger. They track every single dollar that moves through the executive compensation packages just to ensure absolute transparency. The color instantly drained from Chloe's face. The arrogant smirk vanished completely, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She took another step backward, her designer heels scraping awkwardly against the floorboards. She shook her head slightly, a desperate silent plea for me to stop talking, but I held the microphone firmly and kept my eyes locked on hers. And I have to say, Chloe, your dedication to managing Jamal's financial world is certainly impressive, I said, my voice turning razor sharp. Jamal sat straighter in his chair. But what caught Apex Holdings' attention was not your taste in luxury investments, I continued. It was a pattern of suspicious transfers connected to Horizon Logistics and executive compensation processed through Jamal's division. The smile disappeared from Chloe's face. Several transaction paths identified during acquisition due diligence lead to an entity called Viridian Global Investments, I said. A Cayman Islands holding company connected to financial instructions that deserve a much closer review. Jamal pushed his chair back slightly. What are you talking about? He demanded. I kept my eyes on Chloe. I am talking about corporate funds and executive compensation moving through transaction routes that Apex's forensic team has already preserved for review. Chloe shook her head. You are lying. Then you should have nothing to worry about when the accountants examine the original records, I replied. The ballroom became completely silent. I did not tell the crowd that Chloe had stolen a specific amount from Jamal's private accounts because I did not know that yet. What I knew was already damaging enough. A company Elias chaired had found suspicious financial activity touching Jamal's division. Viridian Global Investments was part of the trail. And Chloe suddenly looked like a woman who recognized the name far too well. You were absolutely right about one thing, Chloe, I said. Financial sophistication matters. That is why serious companies preserve the original records instead of trusting whatever story someone tells about where the money went. The ballroom descended into an agonizing, suffocating silence. The air felt so thick it was hard to breathe. The guests sitting at the tables nearest to the dance floor stared at Chloe in absolute horror. The elite society friends she had spent years trying to impress were now looking at her like she was a common thief. My Aunt Clara covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with shock. Chloe stood completely paralyzed in the spotlight. Her mouth opened and closed, but not a single sound emerged. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, her chest heaving under her expensive champagne-colored silk gown. The grand she had spent 8 years building the narrative of the wealthy, sophisticated, high-society wife was being violently ripped to shreds in front of 300 people. Jamal pushed his chair back from the VIP table with a loud, aggressive screech. He stood up, his face a terrifying mixture of confusion, betrayal, and rising fury. He looked at me holding the microphone, and then he turned his head to look at his wife. He had spent years believing Chloe was his equal, his elite partner who elevated his status. He had mocked me for my poverty mindset, while the woman sitting next to him was now connected to financial questions surrounding a hidden offshore account he had never bothered to investigate. Chloe tried to take a step toward him to defend herself, to scream that I was making it all up, but her body betrayed her. Her hand began to shake uncontrollably. Her fingers went completely numb. The crystal champagne flute she had been holding all evening, the glass she had proudly raised to toast my supposed mediocrity, slipped directly through her fingers. The heavy crystal hit the polished hardwood dance floor with a sharp, deafening crack. The glass shattered into 100 sparkling pieces, sending expensive champagne splashing across the tips of her designer shoes. The sound of the shattering glass echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. It was the exact sound of her perfect life completely falling apart. I looked down at the broken glass near my feet, and then looked back up at her terrified face. I offered her one final serene smart. I looked down at the broken glass near my feet, and then looked back up at her terrified face. I offered her one final serene smile. Thank you again for the inspiring toast, Chloe. I said, my voice echoing clearly through the speakers. I think we all learned a very valuable lesson about knowing your worth today. I reached out and placed the silver microphone neatly on the edge of the nearest table. I did not wait for her response. I did not wait for the crowd to erupt into chaotic whispers. I simply turned my back on her and walked calmly off the dance floor, navigating through the stunned, silent guests. I headed straight toward the heavy wooden doors leading out to the main hallway of the estate, needing a moment of fresh air away from the suffocating tension of the ballroom. I knew exactly what was about to happen next. I knew Jamal was not going to sit there quietly and accept the absolute destruction of his reality. He was going to follow me, and I was more than ready for him. The hallway outside the grand ballroom was a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the dance floor. The thick velvet curtains and heavy oak doors muffled the loud music into a dull, rhythmic thud. I walked down the long corridor, feeling the cool air conditioning against my skin, enjoying the quiet solitude. I knew he would follow me. Men like Jamal simply could not handle being publicly outsmarted, especially by the woman they had spent years trying to break. I stopped near a large antique mirror at the end of the hall, adjusting a stray curl that had fallen across my forehead. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the pure adrenaline wash through my system. Right on cue, the heavy ballroom doors burst open. Jamal stormed into the hallway, his face flushed dark red with pure, unadulterated rage. He marched directly toward me, closing the distance with heavy, aggressive footsteps. He did not look like the polished, wealthy executive he had been pretending to be all evening. He looked like a cornered animal completely unhinged by the public humiliation his wife had just endured. He stopped less than 2 feet away from me, using his large frame to block my path back to the reception. He genuinely thought he could intimidate me by invading my personal space. What kind of crazy, malicious lies did you just spew to my wife? Jamal demanded, his voice a harsh, terrifying whisper. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. You think you can just waltz into a high-class event and humiliate my family in front of my corporate colleagues? I paid for 30% of this wedding, Maya. I wrote a massive check to help your struggling family cover this luxury venue, and I demand absolute respect. I will have the estate security guards drag you out of here by your hair right now. I will have you arrested for public defamation and trespassing. I stood perfectly still. I did not shrink back. I did not cross my arms defensively. I looked at the finger he was pointing at my face, and then I looked directly into his furious, bloodshot eyes. You do not command anything here, Jamal, I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft and steady. Whatever money you contributed to this wedding did not buy you authority over this estate. But please go ahead and call security. Let us see exactly who they decide to escort off the property. My absolute lack of fear infuriated him even more. The veins in his neck visibly bulged against his tight silk collar. You are still exactly the same, Jamal snarled, taking another step forward. You are still that same bitter, obsessive, miserable woman who could not handle my ambition. You think making up some insane story about offshore accounts makes you look powerful. It makes you look pathetic. You are obsessed with me. You have spent the last 8 years seething with jealousy because I upgraded my life while you stayed at the absolute bottom. He leaned in closer, trying to use the shared trauma of our past as a weapon. I remember exactly how you looked the night I packed my bags, Maya. I remember you sobbing on that cheap kitchen floor begging me to stay. You were a total loser back then, and you are a total loser now. You will never be anything more than the exhausted waitress I left behind. You can put on a fancy green dress and pretend you belong in these circles, but at the end of the day, you are nothing. You are absolutely nothing. He wanted me to cry. He desperately needed me to validate his cruelty by breaking down in the hallway and proving that he still held the power to destroy my emotional stability. He wanted the terrified 27-year-old girl to reappear and beg for his mercy. But that girl died the morning I checked my bank account and saw $42. The woman standing in front of him now was forged in the fire of absolute survival. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I simply reached into the small emerald clutch resting in my hand and pulled out my smartphone. I unlocked the screen with a quick glance. I opened my encrypted business portfolio application and navigated to my primary asset ledger. I turned the phone around, holding it up perfectly steady. The bright white backlight of the digital screen illuminated Jamal's angry, sweating face in the dim hallway. Take a very close look at this document. Jamal, I said, my tone shifting from conversational to entirely clinical. Read the name registered at the top of the deed. Jamal squinted, his eyes darting across the glowing screen. He wanted to look away, to dismiss whatever I was showing him, but human curiosity and the sheer authority in my voice forced him to read the text. It was a certified digital copy of a commercial real estate deed. The property address listed at the top was the exact location of the historical estate where we were currently standing. Below the property details was the official recorded valuation of $15 million, and listed as the sole primary owner was my commercial real estate firm. I did not just RSVP to this wedding, Jamal, I explained, watching his brow furrow in profound confusion. I donated this entire venue for the weekend as a gift to my cousin Kendra because my company owns the entire estate. I own the grand ballroom you just stormed out of. I own the botanical gardens outside. I own the security team you just threatened to call on me. Whatever check you wrote may have helped with other wedding expenses, Jamal, but it did not pay a single dollar for this estate. I donated the entire venue for the weekend and covered every cost associated with the property so my family could celebrate here in peace. Jamal stared at the screen, his brain completely failing to process the information. He shook his head, letting out a weak, dismissive scoff. "This is fake," he stammered, taking a sudden step backward. "You downloaded some fake template from the internet. You do not own a $15 million estate. You are a waitress. You do not have that kind of capital." I slowly swiped my finger across the glass screen, moving to the next digital file in my portfolio. I did not need to defend my wealth or explain the grueling, brutal years I spent flipping cheap commercial properties, turning small profits into massive acquisitions, until I built a formidable real estate empire. I did not need to justify my success to a man who had tried to bury me. I only needed to show him the reality of his own precarious situation. "If you believe the estate deed is fake, Jamal, then you will probably find this next document absolutely fascinating," I said, holding the phone closer to him. "This is a master commercial lease agreement. It was signed exactly 2 weeks ago between my holding company and Horizon Logistics. I believe that is the logistics company you were so proudly bragging about earlier this evening." Jamal's breath hitched audibly in his throat. His eyes widened to the size of saucers as he recognized the official corporate letterhead of his own company right there on my screen. He recognized the specific address of the massive Midtown warehouse facility his division had just secured. It was the very same multi-million-dollar expansion deal he had thrown in my face at the Champagne Tower to prove his superior status. I scrolled down to the bottom of the lengthy digital contract, revealing the final signature page. There, scrawled in bold black ink, was the signature of Horizon Logistics' authorized regional executive. Directly next to it was my own digital signature, authorized under my title as the Chief Executive Officer of the Commercial Property Group. "You see, Jamal, my firm specializes in acquiring and developing massive industrial spaces across the greater Atlanta area," I explained, keeping my voice remarkably pleasant. When Horizon Logistics needed a massive distribution hub in Midtown to handle their eastern seaboard freight, they came directly to my firm. They signed a 10-year ironclad lease agreement for that facility. I personally reviewed the contract last Thursday. Jamal looked like he was going to physically collapse into the floral wallpaper. The arrogant, powerful executive persona had been completely stripped away, leaving behind a terrified, hyperventilating shell of a man. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but he was utterly incapable of forming a coherent sentence. He looked at the phone, and then he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a raw, suffocating horror as the massive, irreversible power dynamic finally clicked into place in his mind. He realized he had just spent the entire evening mocking, belittling, and throwing petty cash at the woman who literally owned the building where he worked. He realized that the exhausted charity case he thought he had left behind was now holding his entire corporate division in the palm of her hand. "You were right about one thing, Jamal," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, deadly whisper that echoed through the quiet hallway. I do own the building. Your division operates from my property. Horizon Logistics is my corporate tenant, and the warehouse rent is exactly 3 days past due. Jamal stared at the glowing screen of my smartphone like a man who had just been sentenced to the electric chair. His broad shoulders completely collapsed inward, and his chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. The reality of his situation was a heavy, crushing physical weight that was driving him straight into the patterned carpet of the hallway. He was entirely at my mercy. I held the master lease for the massive corporate warehouse his logistics firm operated out of, and he had just spent the entire evening insulting my intelligence, my appearance, and my family. He opened his mouth, his lips trembling as he desperately searched for a way to walk back the horrific cruelty he had unleashed over the past hour. He raised his hands, palms facing outward in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Before a single apology could cross his lips, the heavy double doors leading back to the grand ballroom violently swung open. They hit the brass wall stops with a loud, aggressive crack that echoed down the long corridor. Jessica stormed into the hallway. Chloe's sister-in-law was a vision of pure, frantic entitlement. Her severe blonde bob bounced sharply with every heavy footstep she took. She was still gripping her silver clipboard so tightly that her knuckles were entirely white. Marching dutifully right behind her were two large men dressed in the crisp, dark suits of the estate security team. Chloe trailed just a few steps behind the guards, her champagne-colored silk gown swishing angrily against the floorboards. Chloe had clearly run straight to her sister-in-law after shattering her glass on the dance floor, demanding that Jessica use her self-appointed authority as the wedding coordinator to handle the situation. Jessica pointed a sharp, aggressive finger directly at my face. She did not lower her voice or show an ounce of decorum. She projected her shrill, demanding tone down the entire length of the hallway, treating the space like it belonged exclusively to her. "There she is!" Jessica shouted, turning to the security guards with a look of absolute disgust. "I want this woman escorted off the property right this second. She is actively harassing our VIP guests. She just caused a massive chaotic scene on the dance floor, and now she has cornered my brother-in-law in a private hallway." Jamal flinched violently at the sound of Jessica's voice. He raised a shaking hand weakly trying to stop the impending disaster, but his vocal cords were completely paralyzed by fear. He knew exactly who I was now, and he knew that Jessica was about to make a catastrophic situation 1,000 times worse. Jessica did not even look at Jamal. She was entirely focused on asserting her own dominance. She marched right up to my personal space, acting as a physical shield for Chloe, who was smirking triumphantly from a safe distance. Jessica looked me up and down, her face twisted into a mask of supreme racial and class superiority. "You have absolutely no right to be here, Maya," Jessica sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "You are causing a disturbance and ruining a high-class event that you do not even belong at. Chloe just told me that you are trying to intimidate Jamal by pulling up fake forged real estate documents on your cell phone. Are you really that desperate? Are you seriously trying to extort a wealthy executive by pretending you own commercial property? It is pathetic and it is highly illegal." I did not flinch. I did not step back or raise my voice to match her frantic, chaotic energy. I simply slipped my smartphone back into my emerald clutch, sealing it with a soft click. I looked at Jessica with the calm, clinical detachment of a woman observing a deeply flawed experiment. "I am not extorting anyone, Jessica," I said smoothly. "I am simply having a private conversation with an executive whose division operates from a property leased by his company and whose corporate rent is currently past due." Jessica let out a loud, abrasive laugh that sounded like scraping metal. She turned to the security guards, waving her clipboard aggressively in their direction. "Do not just stand there," she barked, acting as if the men in dark suits were her personal servants. "Grab her arms and physically drag her out to the street. She is trespassing on private property and presenting forged legal documents. If you do not remove her immediately, I will personally see to it that the general manager fires both of you before the reception is over." The two security guards did not move a single muscle. They stood perfectly still, their hands resting casually in front of them, staring straight ahead with blank, professional expressions. They did not reach for me. They did not even acknowledge Jessica's shrill commands. Jessica's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. Her authority was being completely ignored, and it infuriated her beyond measure. She turned her vitriol back onto me, stepping so close I could smell the sharp peppermint of her chewing gum. "You always were a stubborn, ignorant woman," Maya, Jessica hissed, dropping all pretense of being a professional wedding coordinator. "You think you can just walk in here in a nice dress and suddenly outsmart us? You really think you can go toe-to-toe with people who actually understand how money and power work? You are exactly as stupid today as you were 8 years ago." I kept my hands resting easily at my sides, allowing her to dig her own grave. "And how exactly was I stupid 8 years ago, Jessica?" She smiled, a wide, malicious grin that revealed the absolute rot in her character. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to prove that she was the architect of my lowest moment. "You were too stupid to check the tax returns," Jessica bragged, lowering her voice into a cruel, taunting whisper. "When Jamal realized you were nothing but a heavy anchor holding back his potential, he came directly to me. I was his certified financial planner, Maya. I am the one who sat down and personally mapped out his exit strategy. I am the one who structured the routing accounts to make sure every single dollar of his bonus money and your joint savings was legally shielded from the divorce proceedings." Jamal let out a sharp, strangled gasp. He reached out, grabbing Jessica's arm, trying to pull her away, but she aggressively yanked her shoulder out of his grip. She was too heavily intoxicated by the thrill of her own cruelty to stop bragging. "I made sure you walked away with nothing," Jessica continued, her eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. "I advised Jamal on exactly which legal loopholes to exploit so he could keep the downtown condo you spent 3 years renovating with your own bare hands. You were so naive, so uneducated about high-level wealth management that you just signed the settlement papers because you could not afford a real attorney to fight us. I orchestrated your bankruptcy, Maya. I saved Jamal from you. And if you do not turn around and walk out those doors right now, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing and corporate fraud. We destroyed you once and we will gladly do it again." She crossed her arms over her chest, lifting her chin in a display of absolute triumph. She thought she had won. She thought the admission of her financial manipulation would break my spirit and send me running for the exit. Chloe stepped up beside her sister-in-law, matching her smug, deeply arrogant smile. They stood shoulder to shoulder, two women who firmly believed that their lies, their theft, and their white-collar crimes made them untouchable. I let the heavy silence stretch out for a few long seconds. I looked at Jamal, who was now leaning against the floral wallpaper, looking like he was actively having a heart attack. I looked at Chloe, who was still clinging to the grand illusion of her high society life. And finally, I looked at Jessica, the woman who had proudly just confessed to orchestrating the financial ruin of my 20s. I did not scream. I did not threaten them with violence or burst into angry tears. I simply turned my head slightly toward the two large men standing in the hallway and gave a single sharp nod. The security guards moved with terrifying military precision. They did not step toward me. They did not reach for my arms or ask me to leave the premises. Instead, they pivoted sharply in perfect unison and positioned themselves beside the heavy oak doors leading back into the grand ballroom. Their purpose was clear. Jessica, Chloe, and Jamal would not be allowed to storm back into the reception and create another disturbance. The corridor leading toward the main foyer and staircase remained completely open if any of them wanted to leave the property. Jessica's smug smile vanished instantly. She looked at the guards, and then looked back at me, total confusion washing over her features. "What are you doing?" Jessica demanded, her voice losing its commanding edge. "I told you to remove her. Why are you stopping us from going back into the ballroom? Move out of the way right now, or I swear to God I will call the police." "You will not be calling anyone, Jessica," a deep, resonant voice echoed down the corridor. I turned my head and watched Elias turn the corner from the private administrative wing of the estate. My husband walked with the slow, measured stride of a king inspecting his domain. His tailored navy suit caught the dim lighting of the hallway, highlighting the broad, powerful line of his shoulders. He did not look angry. He looked entirely resolute. Elias was not walking empty-handed. Tucked firmly under his right arm was a thick, heavy manila folder. It was not a digital file on a smartphone. It was a massive physical dossier, bound with thick rubber bands and overflowing with printed financial documents. He stopped right beside me, placing a gentle, reassuring hand on the small of my back before shifting his intense, dark gaze onto the three panicked people standing trapped in front of us. The two estate security guards remained beside the ballroom doors, ensuring that the confrontation would not spill back into Kendra's reception. The hallway toward the foyer remained open. Jessica, Chloe, and Jamal were free to leave the estate whenever they wanted, but they were no longer free to disrupt the wedding. Elias stepped up right beside me holding the massive physical dossier. He did not say a word to the three panicked people standing in the corridor. He simply extended his arm and handed the heavy manila folder directly to me. I took it, feeling the substantial weight of hundreds of pages of printed financial documents. The thick rubber bands snapped softly as I pulled them off the cardboard binding. The sound was incredibly loud in the suffocating silence. Jessica took a hesitant step backward, her silver clipboard suddenly looking completely useless in her hands. The aggressive, demanding energy she had weaponized just 2 minutes ago was rapidly evaporating. She stared at the thick stack of papers I was holding, and a deep, unmistakable paranoia began to crawl across her features. She was a financial advisor, and she knew exactly what a forensic audit looked like. Jamal, on the other hand, was completely lost. His brain was already short-circuiting from the realization that I owned his corporate lease, and he simply could not process another threat. He looked at Elias, and then looked at the dossier in my hands, his chest heaving with frantic, shallow breaths. "Maya, what is that?" Jamal asked, his voice cracking pathetically. "What else could you possibly want from me tonight? You already proved your point. You own the building. You have the money. Just call off your security guards and let us go." "I am not holding you here, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and measured. "I am actually doing you a massive favor. I am giving you the one thing you completely denied me 8 years ago. I am giving you the absolute undeniable truth about your finances." I opened the thick folder resting the heavy stack of papers on my forearm. I looked up and locked eyes with Chloe, who was trying to hide slightly behind Jessica's shoulder. During my toast inside the ballroom, I mentioned a specific offshore shell company, I said, projecting my voice clearly down the hallway. Viridian Global Investments. I complimented Chloe on her profound dedication to funneling your money into that specific Cayman Islands account. But I left out one very important detail, Jamal. I left out exactly whose name is listed on the incorporation documents for Viridian Global. Jamal turned his head slowly, looking at his wife. Chloe refused to meet his gaze. She stared rigidly at the floral wallpaper, her jaw clenched so tightly her teeth looked like they might shatter. "It is not Chloe's name on the offshore account, Jamal," I revealed, letting the words hang in the heavy air. "Chloe does not have the financial background or the sophisticated banking network to set up an untraceable international shell company. But do you know who does have that exact specific skill set?" I turned my gaze directly onto the blonde woman standing next to her. "Your certified financial planner," I stated, "Jessica." Jessica flinched as if I had struck her across the face. She immediately opened her mouth to shout a denial, to scream that I was forging documents again, but her voice completely failed her. The sheer terror in her eyes confirmed everything. Jamal let out a sharp, confused breath. He looked at his sister-in-law, and then back at me, shaking his head in a desperate attempt to reject reality. "What are you saying?" he stammered. "Jessica manages all my executive compensation. She handles our tax shielding and our domestic investments. She would never steal from me. We are family." "They are family, Jamal," I corrected him smoothly. "You are just the mark." I looked down at the top page of the dossier, sliding a printed bank statement out from the stack. I read the highlighted numbers out loud. "For the past 3 years, your elite wife and her brilliant sister-in-law have been systematically bleeding your accounts dry," I explained. "They started small, skimming a few $1,000s off your quarterly executive bonuses. When you did not notice the missing funds because you were too busy bragging about your massive lifestyle, they escalated their operation. Jessica used her primary access as your certified financial planner to establish a web of automated routing accounts. She filtered massive chunks of your corporate income and your personal savings directly into Viridian Global Investments." Jamal's mouth dropped open. He took a shaky step toward Jessica, reaching out as if to grab her clipboard, but she recoiled aggressively, pulling herself away from him. "Tell me she is lying," Jamal demanded, his voice rising into a frantic pitch. "Tell me you did not touch my accounts, Jessica. Tell me my money is where you said it was. Jessica did not answer him. She pressed her lips together, refusing to say a single word that could legally incriminate her. Chloe let out a high-pitched, nervous sound, wrapping her arms around her own waist defensively. They set you up beautifully, Jamal. I continued, keeping my tone completely devoid of sympathy. They preyed on your massive, fragile ego. They let you buy the expensive suits, the luxury cars, and the premium VIP tables because they knew as long as you felt like a powerful king, you would never actually look at the underlying math. You thought you had finally found women who were your absolute equals. You thought you had secured high society partners who understood true wealth. But they just saw a gullible, arrogant man who was incredibly easy to steal from. Jamal shook his head violently, pressing his hands to his temples. No, he gasped. No, that is impossible. I check my balances. I get monthly statements. You get the statements Jessica explicitly curated for you, I countered. The exact same way she curated the financial statements during our divorce. I let that truth sink into his panicked brain. I watched the horrible realization dawn on his sweating face as the past collided violently with his present. It really is deeply poetic, I said, taking a slow step toward him. 8 years ago, you hired Jessica to hide your assets from me. She sat in a sterile conference room and mapped out a brilliant exit strategy to ensure I walked away from our marriage with exactly $42. She showed you the exact legal loopholes to exploit so you could steal the downtown condo I renovated with my own 2 hands. You praised her for it. You thought she was a financial genius for bankrupting a waitress who spent years paying for your degree. I paused, letting the cold, heavy silence wrap around his throat. But you forgot one very important rule about thieves, Jamal, I whispered. Once you teach someone how to steal for you, you have simultaneously taught them how to steal from you. Jessica simply recycled the exact same routing tactics she used to hide money from me, but this time she used them on you. She used your own malicious playbook to drain your entire life. Chloe suddenly broke her silence, letting out a loud, desperate scoff. This is ridiculous, Chloe shouted, her voice cracking under the intense pressure. You cannot prove any of this, Maya. You are just a bitter ex-wife trying to cause trouble because you are jealous. You have no legal authority to access Jamal's financial records. This entire folder is completely fabricated. I looked at Chloe with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disgust. I never said Apex accessed Jamal's private bank accounts, Chloe, I said calmly. My husband is the chairman of Apex Holdings. During the acquisition due diligence and pre-closing integration review, Apex examined Horizon Logistics corporate books, executive compensation records, expense authorizations, and company-controlled payment systems. That review uncovered something the acquisition team could not ignore. Several payments connected to Jamal's division had been redirected through accounts associated with Viridian Global Investments. Some involved executive compensation processed through Horizon. Others involved corporate funds approved under Jamal's authorization credentials. The pattern was serious enough that Apex's forensic team preserved the records and expanded its internal review. I pulled one page from the dossier. This is not Jamal's private checking account, I explained. This is a Horizon Logistics disbursement record. It shows company money leaving an account controlled by the corporation and moving through a transaction chain connected to Viridian Global Investments. I removed another page. And this is an executive compensation record showing payments allocated to Jamal being redirected according to instructions already stored within the compensation system. Jessica's face changed, only slightly. But I saw it. She knew exactly what I was holding. Apex did not need to invade Jamal's private banking history to discover the problem. Chloe and Jessica had allowed their scheme to touch corporate systems and corporate money. That was enough to create a trail. Chloe crossed her arms tightly. That proves absolutely nothing about me, she snapped. Maybe not by itself, I replied. That is why Apex preserved the records instead of pretending a corporate audit was a criminal trial. I turned toward Jamal. What these documents prove right now is that money connected to your division and compensation passed through suspicious routes tied to Viridian Global Investments. They also show that some of those transactions were approved using your executive credentials. Jamal stared at the page. His confidence collapsed another inch. But my personal savings, he whispered. What about my personal accounts? I looked directly at Jessica. That is a question for the woman you authorized to manage them. Jamal slowly turned toward her. Jessica stopped smiling. Tell me she is lying, Jamal demanded. Tell me my personal money is exactly where you said it was. Jessica pressed her lips together. She did not answer. That silence frightened him more than anything in the dossier. I stepped closer. Apex discovered the corporate trail, Jamal. Whatever happened inside your private accounts is something you are going to have to verify with your banks, your attorneys, and the woman you trusted to manage your finances. His breathing became shallow. For the first time all evening, he was not being told exactly how ruined he was. He was being forced to confront something worse. He did not know. He had spent 8 years bragging about wealth he rarely examined personally. Jessica produced the reports. Chloe managed the lifestyle. Jamal enjoyed the numbers they placed in front of him. Now the corporate records had exposed enough inconsistencies to make every one of those numbers questionable. I handed him the dossier. Do not take my word for anything I said. Read what Apex actually found. Then tomorrow morning call every financial institution where you believe you have money and ask them for the original records yourself. Jamal took the folder with trembling hands. He opened it. The first pages showed Horizon disbursement records. The next showed compensation instructions. Then came internal approval logs carrying his executive credentials. Finally, he reached the records connecting several transaction paths to Viridian Global Investments. His face went pale. These documents did not prove that every dollar he had ever earned was gone. They proved something far more immediate. His corporate financial world was contaminated by transactions he could not explain, and the people he trusted most were refusing to tell him what had happened to his personal money. Jamal let out a sharp, ragged gasp. He gripped the edges of the dossier so tightly the thick paper began to crumple under his fingertips. He looked up from the documents and stared at Chloe and Jessica, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror as the absolute finality of his total destruction crashed down upon him. Jamal stood frozen in the center of the lavish hallway, staring down at the thick physical dossier in his trembling hands. The heavy oak doors to the grand ballroom remained firmly blocked by the two imposing security guards trapping him in a nightmare of his own making. He flipped past the first page of the forensic audit, his eyes darting frantically across the highlighted bank statements. The bright yellow marker illuminated the undeniable truth of his absolute financial ruin. His breath hitched in his throat, sounding like dry leaves scraping against concrete. He turned another crisp white page and then another, his large shoulders collapsing inward with every single sheet of paper. He was looking directly at 3 years of systematic embezzlement. He saw his massive executive bonuses, his carefully guarded stock options, and his personal savings accounts completely drained. Every single dollar he had earned had been quietly funneled through a complex web of automated routing numbers. The destination for all his stolen wealth was perfectly documented on the final page. It was the Cayman Islands Shell Company, registered entirely to his white sister-in-law Jessica. Jamal let out a sharp, agonizing gasp of pure horror. His entire body began to shake violently. The custom-tailored charcoal suit he wore like a suit of armor suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for his deflating frame. He looked up from the devastating audit logs and stared directly at his wife. Chloe was no longer smirking. She was pressed flat against the floral wallpaper of the corridor, looking like a trapped animal calculating her only route of escape. Jessica stood right beside her, glaring defensively and refusing to show a single ounce of remorse. Jamal gripped the sides of the heavy manila folder so tightly the thick cardboard began to tear under his fingertips. "You stole from me!" Jamal screamed, his voice echoing off the high ceiling with a raw, desperate fury. He threw the heavy dossier directly at Chloe's feet. The thick stack of financial documents spilled across the patterned carpet, scattering the undeniable proof of her profound betrayal. "You took everything. I gave you the world, Chloe. I gave you the luxury cars, the high society connections, the premium lifestyle you begged for. How could you do this to your own husband? How could you let your sister-in-law bankrupt my entire life?" Chloe stared down at the scattered bank statements and then slowly lifted her gaze to meet his furious eyes. The terrified, trapped expression on her perfectly contoured face vanished completely. The high-pitched, sweet theatrical voice she had been using all evening instantly evaporated. She dropped the entire grand illusion of the loving, supportive elite society wife. Her posture shifted, her shoulders squaring aggressively as she glared back at the man she had just financially gutted. "Are you really this stupid, Jamal?" Chloe snapped, her voice dropping into a harsh, vicious register that cut through the tension like a knife. "Do you honestly believe I married you because I respected your massive corporate vision? Do not make me laugh. I married you because you were the easiest, most arrogant mark I had ever met in my entire life. You walked into my sister-in-law's financial planning office 8 years ago, looking for a way to hide your pathetic savings from the waitress you were married to. You were so incredibly eager to prove you were a powerful executive that you handed over complete control of your routing numbers without asking a single intelligent question about the actual accounting process." Jamal staggered backward as if she had physically struck him across the face. He reached out and grabbed the brass railing along the wall just to keep himself from collapsing to the floor. Chloe took a bold, aggressive step toward him, her champagne-colored silk gown swishing loudly against the scattered audit documents. She pointed a sharp, manicured finger directly at his chest, dripping with absolute, unadulterated contempt. "You abandoned a woman who literally starved herself to pay for your education," Chloe shouted, gesturing wildly in my direction. "You stole every single dime from her just to buy my attention. Did you honestly think a man who gleefully robs his fiercely loyal wife is someone I would ever trust with my own future? You proved right from the very beginning that you had absolutely no loyalty and no moral compass. You showed me exactly who you were, Jamal. You showed me you were a greedy, gullible fool who only cared about feeding his massive, fragile ego. So I fed your ego. I praised your cheap promotions. I stroked your pride and I let you play the wealthy king while Jessica and I quietly took exactly what we wanted." The profound irony of the situation struck the hallway like a bolt of lightning. Jamal had abandoned me 8 years ago, explicitly claiming I was a terrible financial burden. He told me I had a poverty mindset that would drag his brilliant career into the dirt. He firmly believed he needed an elite, sophisticated woman to match his corporate momentum. Now he was standing completely bankrupt, realizing the woman he left me for had actively preyed on his supreme arrogance to drain him entirely dry. I traded a partner who built him up for a parasite who tore him down. "You are a monster!" Jamal choked out, tears of sheer humiliation pooling in his bloodshot eyes. "You took my personal savings, Chloe. You took the money I earned. We are completely ruined. I have nothing left in my primary accounts. How are we supposed to survive?" Chloe let out a loud, abrasive scoff, rolling her eyes with heavy, dramatic disgust. "We are not surviving anything, Jamal," she countered fiercely. "I am filing for divorce the minute the courthouse opens on Monday morning. I am not staying legally attached to a broke middle management loser whose own division cannot even keep its warehouse rent current. You have absolutely zero assets left to offer me. You are officially dead weight, and I do not settle for men who belong at the bottom of the food chain." She threw his exact cruel words right back in his face, completing the absolute destruction of his pride. Jamal let out a loud, agonizing groan, burying his sweating face in his trembling hands. But the horrific reality of his situation was not just about a failed marriage or a depleted savings account. The true terror was buried deep in the corporate audit logs scattered across the floor. He dropped his hands and looked at Jessica, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated panic as the final catastrophic piece of the puzzle clicked into his frantic brain. "Jessica," Jamal gasped, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "The operating funds. The logistics expansion capital. You did not just take my personal bonuses. You filtered the corporate staging budgets through my executive authorization codes." Jessica crossed her arms firmly, refusing to offer him a single ounce of comfort. "You signed the authorization forms, Jamal," she said coldly. "I just put the documents on your desk and you signed them without reading the fine print. Because you were too busy planning your next luxury vacation to do your actual job." Jamal's knees buckled. He grabbed his chest, hyperventilating as a massive panic attack seized his entire body. He realized Chloe and Jessica had not just stolen his personal wealth. They had actively embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars in corporate funds directly from Horizon Logistics using his secure executive credentials. He was the authorized signer. How was the one legally responsible for the missing company money? The realization hit him with the force of a runaway freight train. If his parent company discovered the missing capital, he would not just be fired. He would be criminally indicted for massive corporate fraud. He would face federal charges, and he would absolutely go to prison for the debts his wife had secretly racked up. He had no money left to hire a defense attorney and no assets to cover the corporate restitution. The man who thought he was invincible was now facing a concrete jail cell. Jamal slowly turned his head and looked directly at me. His arrogant swagger was completely gone. The smug, condescending smirk he wore at the champagne tower had been permanently erased. He stared at me with the desperate, pleading eyes of a terrified child. He took 2 shaky steps toward me and completely collapsed. Jamal fell heavily to his knees, right in the middle of the hallway, his expensive, custom-tailored trousers hitting the floor with a soft thud. He looked up at me, tears streaming freely down his sweating face. "Maya, please," he begged, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob. "Please, you have to help me fix this disaster. You own the massive Midtown building. You hold the master lease for my corporate warehouse. Please give me a temporary grace period so I do not lose everything." I looked down at the man who had mercilessly mocked my poverty just an hour ago. He was actively pleading for my mercy, begging me to save the very career he had used to humiliate me. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. Before I'd even opened my mouth to respond, Elias stepped smoothly in front of me. My husband moved with the calm, commanding presence of a man who held the entire world in his hands. He reached up and slowly adjusted the silver cufflinks on his bespoke navy suit, his expression entirely unreadable and focused. He looked down at Jamal with a gaze so intensely cold it could have frozen the entire corridor. "About that job, Jamal," Elias said, his deep, resonant voice echoing through the quiet hallway. "I think you might be slightly confused about your current employment status." Jamal blinked, his tear-filled eyes darting up to look at Elias. "What are you talking about?" Jamal stammered, gripping the empty folder. "I am a vice president. I have a binding executive contract." Elias let out a soft, humorless breath, crossing his arms firmly over his broad chest as he delivered the final, devastating blow. "You had an executive contract," Elias corrected him smoothly. "But corporate structures change very quickly in the modern business world. You see, my primary holding company officially closed the acquisition of Horizon Logistics exactly 1 hour ago. We secured the final signatures while you were busy trying to humiliate my wife at the Champagne Tower. And my very first official act as the new chairman of the board is a complete ground-up restructuring of the executive tier." Jamal's mouth dropped open. The last remaining shred of color drained entirely from his terrified face, leaving him completely pale. He stared at Elias, completely incapable of comprehending the massive, catastrophic reality crashing down on his head. Elias did not wait for Jamal to process the information. He casually reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out his sleek black smartphone. He dialed a number, keeping his eyes locked firmly on the broken man kneeling on the floor. The call was answered on the very first ring. Elias spoke directly to Apex Holdings' general counsel. "Suspend Jamal's executive access immediately pending the internal review," he said. "Freeze his corporate credit card system credentials and authorization privileges. Preserve every relevant record connected to his division and initiate a full forensic audit of the suspicious offshore transfers identified during due diligence." He paused, listening to the response on the other end. "Have legal preserve the evidence and prepare the appropriate fraud referral if the review confirms misconduct requiring outside investigation," Elias continued. "Nothing gets deleted, altered, or quietly explained away." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Jamal stared up at him. "You cannot fire me because of a conversation in a hallway," he said weakly. "I am not deciding the final outcome of an investigation in a hallway," Elias replied. "Your access is suspended because Apex now controls Horizon Logistics, and the acquisition review identified serious financial irregularities connected to your division." HR, legal, and the forensic team will determine what happens to your employment after they review the evidence. Jamal's face went pale. So I am suspended, immediately, Elias said. You will not access another corporate account system or authorization code until the review is complete. The distinction did not comfort him. For a man who had spent the entire evening boasting about his executive power, being suddenly locked out of that power was devastating enough. A loud, sharp gasp echoed down the hallway. I turned my head and saw Chloe and Jessica backing away from the horrifying scene. The two women who had spent the entire evening acting untouchable finally understood that the situation had moved beyond family humiliation. Apex was preserving the corporate records. Its legal department was preparing a formal fraud referral. Investigators would decide what happened after that. Chloe looked at Jessica. Jessica looked toward the staircase. For the first time, neither woman had a clever line ready. We need to leave, Chloe hissed, grabbing Jessica by the arm. Jessica pulled away from her. Do not touch me, she snapped. You said those routing accounts were protected, Chloe whispered furiously. Lower your voice, Jessica warned. Protected from what? Jamal shouted from behind them. From me. Both women froze. Jamal pushed himself back to his feet. Tell me right now what happened to my personal accounts. Chloe looked away. Jessica tightened her grip on her clipboard. Call your bank tomorrow, she said. That answer broke whatever restraint Jamal still possessed. Tomorrow, Jamal shouted. You managed my money for 8 years, and now you are telling me to call my bank tomorrow. The argument became loud enough that David appeared at the end of the hallway with another member of the estate security team. Behind him were 2 uniformed police officers. They had not arrived to investigate an international corporate fraud case. They had been called because the wedding reception had produced repeated disturbances, threats, shouting, and damaged property. One officer raised his hand. Everyone stopped talking for a moment. Chloe immediately stepped forward. Thank God you are here, she announced. This woman has been harassing us all night. She pointed directly at me. The officer looked at Chloe, then at me, then at David. David remained professional. There has been an ongoing disturbance involving these guests, he explained. Management is asking that the parties responsible for the disruption leave the property. We would also like the incident documented. The second officer looked toward the ballroom doors. Anyone injured? No, David replied. Any weapons? No. Then everyone needs to lower their voices, the officer said. Jessica immediately tried to take control. Officer, this woman is claiming she has financial records belonging to my brother-in-law. She is threatening us with some kind of corporate investigation. The officer did not reach for handcuffs. That is not something we are determining in a wedding hallway tonight, he replied. If there is evidence of financial wrongdoing, your attorneys or the company involved can provide it to the appropriate investigators. Elias nodded once. That process is already being handled through corporate counsel. The officer looked at him. Then keep it there. That single sentence restored reality to the entire scene. No dramatic instant conviction. No police officer pretending to understand hundreds of pages of corporate records after looking at them for 30 seconds. The evidence would go where evidence was supposed to go. Chloe seemed almost relieved until David stepped forward. Regardless of the financial dispute, management is asking you and Ms. Jessica to leave the estate for the remainder of tonight's event. You cannot throw me out, Chloe snapped. I am family. This is a private venue, David replied. The bride and groom deserve to finish their reception without another confrontation. Jessica pointed toward me. Then she leaves too. David looked at me. The owner of the estate is not being removed from her own property, he said. Jessica's face went blank. Chloe slowly turned toward me. The humiliation of that sentence was quieter than an arrest, and somehow far worse. One of the officers gestured toward the main entrance. Ladies, you have been asked to leave. We are going to remain here while you collect whatever personal items you need and exit peacefully. Chloe's eyes filled with rage. She looked at Jamal. Tell them. Jamal did not move. Tell them who we are, Chloe demanded. Jamal gave a broken laugh. I do not even know who we are anymore. Chloe recoiled. Jessica grabbed her arm. We are leaving. They began walking toward the staircase. Halfway there, Chloe turned on Jessica. "You told me no one could trace Viridian," she whispered fiercely. Jessica stopped. "Do not say another word. You said the accounts were protected." Chloe, shut up. "You took your consulting percentage every quarter and now you want me to shut up." The hallway went completely silent. Jessica's face turned white. Even the officers noticed the exchange, but neither interrupted. Chloe realized too late what she had just said. Jessica leaned toward her. "Every word you say is making this worse." "Good," Chloe snapped. "Maybe I am tired of being the only person carrying this." The two women started arguing all over again as security escorted them toward the foyer. This time they were not being dragged away in handcuffs. They were simply being removed from the celebration they had tried to dominate. The financial consequences would come later through records, investigators, attorneys, and courts. That was exactly where they belonged. I turned my attention back to Jamal. He had lost his prestigious job, his stolen wealth, his treacherous wife, and his massive, fragile pride in a single spectacular hour. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, realizing he threw away a loyal partner for an illusion that destroyed him. I did not scream or offer pity. I simply turned my back. Elias wrapped his arm around my waist, and we walked happily back into the ballroom. The moment the ballroom doors opened, the sound of the jazz band washed over me again. For one strange second, everything looked exactly as it had before. Crystal chandeliers still glowed above the dance floor. White roses still covered the tables. Waiters still moved through the room balancing silver trays. Kendra was still sitting beside Marcus at the sweetheart table wearing the most beautiful wedding dress I had ever seen. The entire world had not stopped because Jamal's illusion collapsed in a hallway. That realization mattered to me. This was still my cousin's wedding. I refused to let anyone take that from her. Kendra stood the moment she saw me. She rushed across the ballroom before I could reach the table. "Maya," she whispered, pulling me into a tight embrace. I immediately held her. "I am so sorry," I said. "None of this was supposed to happen tonight." She pulled back and stared at me as if I had said something ridiculous. "You are apologizing to me. It is your wedding." "Exactly," she replied. "And I invited you because I wanted you here." Chloe hijacked my microphone. "Jessica changed your seats without asking me. Jamal spent the evening trying to humiliate you. None of that belongs to you." Marcus joined us and placed a gentle hand at the center of Kendra's back. "Your cousin has spent the last 15 minutes blaming herself for not noticing what Jessica was doing with the seating chart," he said. Kendra shook her head. "I should have caught it. You were getting married," I told her. "You were allowed to think about yourself today." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then stop thinking about them," she said. "Stay. Dance with your husband. Eat cake with your daughter. I want the rest of my wedding to be about the people who actually love each other." That sentence hit me harder than any insult Jamal had delivered all evening. The people who actually love each other. I looked across the ballroom. Elias had already found Zuri. She was sitting at our little table near the kitchen doors, eating a chocolate strawberry with both hands, and somehow managing to get chocolate on the front of her white dress. When she saw me, she waved excitedly. "Mommy, look." I laughed for the first time that entire evening. I walked over and crouched beside her. "That looks delicious." "It is Dad's," she whispered, as if revealing classified information. "But he said I could have the bigger half." I looked at Elias. He shrugged. She negotiated aggressively. Zuri giggled. I wiped a streak of chocolate from her cheek. For 8 years I had imagined what it would feel like if Jamal ever saw the life he abandoned. I used to picture him regretting everything. I imagined shock, jealousy, apologies. I imagined him finally recognizing my value. But sitting beside my daughter that night, I understood how completely irrelevant his recognition had become. Zuri did not need Jamal to validate the life I built. Neither did I. The band started playing again. Kendra and Marcus returned to the center of the floor. Guests gathered around them. Elias held out his hand toward me. "Dance with me." I looked at Zuri. She immediately waved us away. "Go," she ordered. "I am finishing the strawberry." I placed my hand in Elias's. He led me onto the dance floor. We did not dance particularly well. That was one of the things I loved about us. Elias could negotiate acquisitions involving hundreds of millions of dollars without blinking, but give him a slow song, and suddenly he counted steps under his breath like a nervous teenager. 1, 2, 3, he whispered. Are you counting? Absolutely not. You are. I am conducting a risk assessment. I laughed against his shoulder. For the first time since arriving at the estate, my entire body relaxed. I stopped looking for Jamal. I stopped wondering where Chloe and Jessica had gone. I stopped waiting for another attack. The rest of the night belonged to Kendra. We cut cake. We took photographs. Zuri danced until her curls came loose from their clips. At one point, David brought our table a small tray of customized desserts, despite my repeated insistence that he did not need to treat us differently. Zuri considered this evidence that owning an event venue was the greatest profession in the world. By midnight, the ballroom had begun to empty. Elias carried a sleeping Zuri toward our car, while I stayed behind for a few minutes to make certain Kendra had everything she needed. She hugged me again before leaving with Marcus. Do not disappear for another 8 years, she told me. I smiled. I will not. I meant it. Avoiding my relatives had protected me during a period when I needed distance. But I no longer needed to hide from rooms simply because Jamal might walk into them. He was not powerful enough to determine where I belonged. The drive home was quiet. Zuri slept across the back seat. Elias kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting lightly over mine. For several miles, neither of us spoke. Then he glanced at me. Are you okay? I looked out at the Atlanta skyline. I think so. That is not a confident answer. I smiled. Ask me tomorrow. He squeezed my hand. Tomorrow arrived far too quickly. At 8:14 in the morning, my phone began vibrating on the kitchen counter. Unknown number. I ignored it. It rang again. Then came a text. Maya, please, I need to talk to you about Zuri. Every muscle in my body tightened. Elias saw my face immediately. Jamal. I nodded. The message continued. I did not know. You have to understand that. I never knew she existed. I want to see my daughter. I stared at those 4 words. My daughter. A part of me became 27 years old again. Pregnant. Terrified. Calling a disconnected number. Sending emails that bounced back. Searching for a man who had made himself impossible to reach. I felt anger rise in my throat. Then I heard Zuri singing to herself upstairs while getting dressed. The anger changed shape. This was not about punishing Jamal anymore, it was about protecting her. I typed one response. Do not contact Zuri directly. If you want to address paternity or request contact, you will do it through counsel and in a way that protects her emotional well-being. She is 7 years old, and Elias is the only father she has ever known. You do not get to enter her life suddenly because you discovered her existence at a wedding. I read it twice, then I sent it. Jamal responded almost immediately. I am her father. I stared at the screen. Biology was possible. Fatherhood was something else. I did not answer again. Later that morning, our family attorney contacted him. The instructions were simple: no surprise visits, no school pickups, no approaching Zuri through relatives, no promises made directly to a 7-year-old. If Jamal wanted to pursue paternity or a future relationship, he could do it carefully, responsibly, and through the appropriate process. I was not going to use Zuri as a weapon, as I was also not going to hand her emotional safety to a man who had spent less than 60 seconds processing her existence before returning to insulting me. That afternoon, Elias found me standing beside the windows in my home office. Do you think I am being cruel? I asked. No. He answered too quickly. I turned around. You did not even think about it. I have thought about it since last night, he said. He walked closer. If Jamal wants to prove he can be safe, consistent, and responsible, then that will take time. Zuri is not a promotion he can claim because he suddenly discovered an opening. My eyes burned. Elias reached for my hand. Whatever happens legally or biologically does not change what she is to me. I knew that. Still hearing him say it loosened something inside my chest. Dad. That was what Zuri called him. Not because a court ordered it, not because DNA demanded it, because he had been there for fevers, nightmares, school plays, scraped knees, birthday cakes, and every ordinary Tuesday morning that makes someone a parent. The corporate fallout unfolded much more slowly than the wedding. Apex Holdings formally completed its acquisition of Horizon Logistics that night, but Elias did not personally decide the outcome of a complex financial investigation based on a hallway argument. The next Monday, an independent forensic team began reviewing Jamal's division. His access to sensitive corporate systems had already been suspended. HR and legal counsel interviewed employees. The team preserved approval logs, payment records, executive compensation instructions, and internal communications. The transactions tied to Viridian Global were examined one by one. What investigators found was more complicated than the spectacular version of revenge people like to imagine. Some approvals carried Jamal's credentials. Some documents appeared to have been placed in front of him among routine paperwork. Several transfers had been structured through systems Jessica managed. There were questions about what Jamal knew, what he ignored, and what he signed without reading. Apex did not need to answer the criminal questions. Its responsibility was simpler. Jamal's division had serious control failures, and his performance had already been marked for restructuring before the wedding. His employment was formally terminated after the internal review. For the first time in his adult life, his title disappeared. No vice president, no executive access card, no corporate expense account, no company car, just Jamal. The evidence involving suspicious corporate transfers was referred to the appropriate investigative authorities. Then Apex stepped back. Weeks passed. Investigators requested records. Attorneys responded. Financial institutions reviewed accounts. Nobody was arrested because someone dramatically pointed across a ballroom. The process moved through documents, interviews, subpoenas, and lawyers. That was less cinematic. It was also far more terrifying for the people involved because it could not be shouted away. Jessica retained counsel almost immediately. Chloe did the same. Their alliance collapsed within days. Each blamed the other. Each claimed she had only followed instructions. Each produced messages designed to make the other look like the architect. I learned most of this through Elias, because Apex's legal department occasionally updated the board regarding the corporate side of the investigation. I deliberately refused to ask for every detail. Their destruction was no longer my hobby. Months later, the investigation into the corporate transfers was still continuing. I did not need an instant prison sentence to feel vindicated. Consequences had already arrived. Jessica's financial planning practice lost clients after news of the investigation circulated privately through her professional network. Chloe and Jamal separated. The luxury lifestyle they had paraded in front of me began disappearing piece by piece. The leased car went back. The memberships expired. The oversized house was listed. But the most interesting part was what happened when Jamal finally obtained original records from his personal financial institutions. He called my attorney afterward. Not me. My attorney later told me only what I needed to know. Jamal had discovered that his personal financial situation was substantially worse than he believed. For years he had relied on Jessica prepared. Some assets existed. Some did not. Some investments had been liquidated. Some transfers required further investigation. The truth was not the clean, dramatic zero balance he had imagined in the hallway. It was a maze, and now he had to walk through every inch of it himself. I thought about the $42 he left me 8 years earlier. There had been no maze for me. No financial planner. No attorney. No corporate legal department. There had been a balance on a screen and rent due in days. I survived it anyway. That was the difference between us. 3 months after the wedding, I returned to the historical estate alone one early morning. The grounds were quiet. No guests, no music, no champagne towers. Just sunlight coming through the oak trees and a maintenance crew preparing the gardens for another weekend event. David met me near the ballroom. "Everything looks good," he reported. We have 2 weddings this weekend and the corporate retreat next Wednesday. I nodded. Before leaving, I walked into the ballroom by myself. I stood near the champagne tower area where Jamal had first cornered me. The room looked ordinary without hundreds of people watching. I tried to feel something dramatic. Victory. Revenge. Triumph. Instead, I felt gratitude. Not toward Jamal, toward the woman I had been at 27, the woman sitting on a cheap apartment floor with $42. She had no idea what came next. She did not know she was pregnant. She did not know she would raise a brilliant little girl. She did not know she would meet Elias. She did not know she would learn commercial real estate from the ground up, build a portfolio, acquire distressed properties, restore an historic estate, and eventually own assets worth more than Jamal had ever imagined. She simply knew she had to survive the next morning. So she did. Then the next one. Then another. That was how my empire actually began. Not with millions. With $42 and the refusal to stay broken. That evening I came home to find Zuri and Elias sitting on the kitchen floor surrounded by cardboard pieces. I stared at them. What happened? Dad bought a bookshelf, Zuri announced. Elias looked offended. The instructions are misleading. You run Apex Holdings. Corporate acquisitions do not require tiny wooden pegs, he replied. I laughed so hard I had to lean against the counter. Zuri crawled over and hugged my waist. Are you happy, Mommy? The question caught me off guard. I looked down at her. Then at Elias. Then around the home we had built together. Yes, I said, I really am. Jamal once believed leaving me was the smartest decision he ever made. Maybe it was. Not for him. For me. Because the moment he emptied that account, he forced me to discover a truth I might never have learned while trying to make myself small enough for his ego. I was capable of rebuilding everything. Money, career, home, trust, love, family. 8 years earlier, Jamal walked away believing he had taken my future with him. He had only taken $42 worth of evidence that I had trusted the wrong man. Everything valuable came afterward. I kissed the top of Zuri's head. Elias finally managed to attach one shelf correctly and raised both hands in victory. I applauded. Outside the windows, Atlanta glowed beneath the evening sky. Somewhere in that city, Jamal was dealing with the consequences of the choices he made. For once, I did not care what his bank balance was. I did not care what title appeared